Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last couple of weeks, America has asked, what is our strategy to defeat ISIS? And what is the President's plan to prevent the spread of barbarism in Syria and Iraq? For all of our advancement in self-governance, the rule of law, and the betterment of people's lives, the world stands in shock that beheadings, immolations, crucifixions, sexual enslavement, and human suffering as a way of governance could exist on earth today. As the world has watched in horror, it has also looked to America. Where America leads, nations stand shoulder to shoulder. Where America is absent, tyranny takes its chances and rears its ugly head. But who would have thought barbarity would emerge? Last year, the President, since last year, has been unable to articulate his strategy to aid our ally in Iraq to combat ISIS. As a combat veteran of Iraq that has had to watch my American and Iraqi friends die, that has had to handle the flesh and blood of battle, that has had to do terrible things to destroy enemies, that has had to watch the good people of Iraq suffer in absence of effective government, this is deeply personal. It is personal because I have lived among the Sunni Arab. I have celebrated his victories, his weddings, his birthdays, and his accomplishments. I have mourned as close Iraqi friends have died to acts of terror, mourned when Iraq's educated, intelligent, and free people have been expunged. The President's refusal to negotiate a status of forces agreement and decision to abandon Iraq in 2012 is largely responsible and aided ISIS' path to destruction in that country. We soldiers and service members who have sacrificed so much in Iraq weep. We defeated Saddam's army, toppled the Ba'athist government, captured and brought a world tyrant to justice, fought an insurgency, and stood shoulder to shoulder with disenfranchised Sunnis and Kurds to restore control to Iraq's government. We turned the country around with a military pause. The President used that pause for abandonment and political expediency. Where we sacrificed, he quit. I speak for so many of the Iraq veterans when I say, Mr. President, you have hurt us deeply. You have torn a hole within us. We are at a loss to see the state of Iraq today. Now, as we ask what can be done, we see a strategy offered by this administration. I heard it yesterday in the House Armed Services Committee when Secretary of Defense Carter and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Dempsey attempted to articulate it. I left more confused than when I entered. The President is offering a plan without vision or conviction. Indeed, Secretary Carter could not even name it, calling it, and I quote, the so-called 9-line strategy, end quote. So-called? Do we not even have enough conviction to call the strategy some name? Is it our strategy or not? Are we so unsure of it that we do not even know what to call it? And then we were informed of the, and I quote, lily pad strategy, end quote. I suppose that is the one that makes us look like a bunch of toads. The 9 lines, if we decide to actually call it that, this strategy, when taken together, are mostly passive and defensive. In my 21 years of military infantry service, I have never seen enemies defeated by defense. While passive measures are important, they are only complementary. The President is looking for nations in the Middle East to lead. Middle Eastern countries are looking to the United States for leadership. We cannot approach this problem like pushing a strand of wet spaghetti by the front, and it will go where you want it to go. If Iraq and Syria were a crime-ridden neighborhood, This 9-line strategy would be like relying on neighborhood watches to physically fight criminals and restore leadership of the town. The mayor and police would then tell them, well, if you clean up your neighborhood, then we will come and provide the protection that you require. If only life worked that way. The military can provide pauses, but we cannot provide an Iraqi collapse when the president pulls out all the protection necessary to sustain a nascent government. If the United States is not committed with a diplomatic, economic, and informational solution, all the heroics exerted by our men and women in uniform to provide a window will be squandered once again if we abandon our gains. Secretary Carter and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Dempsey spoke of trying to find people willing to fight in Iraq. There are plenty of them. The problem is they are Sunni Arabs and Kurds. They do not wish to live under ISIS, yet we will not organize them into a Sunni Arab and Sunni Kurd federation that would actually stand a chance of success and would be a deadly blow to the objectives of ISIS. They want to govern themselves because Baghdad cannot include them. They do not wish to live under ISIS barbarity, and we should embrace them. In the interim, what can be done that is not passive? How about some of this? Cripple Raqqa. This town is clear that it is the center of ISIS power. The president's cabinet says, we are worried about collateral damage and civilian casualties. Newsflash, the most humane thing we can do to end the suffering of hundreds of thousands of people is cripple what ISIS draws its strength from. Destroy their infrastructure, hammer the electricity capacity of that city, destroy the bridges on their roads of ingress and egress, take away the oil refining installations that they possess and use to fund themselves with millions of dollars of illegal cash. We have the ability to rebuild those later, but ISIS would be diminished deeply by their loss. The most humane thing we can do to protect civilians is defeat the barbarians causing their suffering. That is true humanity. And if the United States leads, others will stand shoulder to shoulder. Mr. President, we need you to lead. We hear talk about counter-messaging. Well, here's something every American can help with. News stations. Stop putting ISIS recruiting videos as B-roll on your newscasts. Replace it with crosshairs and explosions of their defeat, or show the world their acts of barbarity instead for the B-roll. Stop using their images and their propaganda for furthering American newscasts. Americans, write your local news stations and tell them to stop it. Iran. Here is the cold reality and its impact on ISIS and Middle East unrest. Lifting sanctions on Iran will introduce tens of billions of dollars into these war-torn nations and will destabilize the entire region. Mr. President, do not lift the sanctions on Iran. They must show good action before we show good will. Finally, we must go back to the drawing board on this so-called strategy of half-heartedness. Using American warriors should mean backing them with the full weight and might of this republic. And Mr. President, do you not realize that our enemies hear you loud and clear when you say you will not sign the defense authorization? Secretary Carter, do you not realize that we are still negotiating it between both houses of Congress? Why do you say you support a veto when we are still in the process of its negotiation? By such actions, one thing is certainly clear. Nothing is too good for the troops, and nothing is what they will get. Instead, lead, achieve, get an ISIS strategy worthy of this mighty republic. Sign the defense authorization, and let's get back to our constitutional requirement to provide for our nation's defense. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.